Okay, it's very hard to be the last, so I promise I'll be a bit nice and short as I can. When we're talking politics here, so usually the audience is quite engaged with that. This research is part of my PhD that I completed last year. And then of course I've extended a little bit considering we're looking at the political engagement, and I've also tried to include new data from the elections that we had, Italian elections from like we had last month pretty much, even though data are not really up to date, and we're going to talk about that in a second. This study that was conducted for my PhD was on the interest of policymakers and political parties in engaging with the Italian diaspora from a political perspective. So why countries of origin are interested in general, and in Italy specifically, in engaging and allowing migrants, permanent migrants, to vote and cast a vote for the country of origin. So that was the background for my research. And even though I looked specifically on the Italian case, it's very important to see how the trend of what's going on around the world, that more and more countries are engaging with these type of policies. More and more countries are implementing policies to engage migrants in the political process. These figures are from 2007, is the major study was conducted with 115 countries around the world and implemented at some level policies to allow immigrants to cast the vote. It's very interesting because it seems like the trend is increasing, and it's important to mention that it really depends. Not all countries implemented a policy alike to the Italian one, so implementing representation in parliament, but amongst the European countries, Croatia, France, Italy, Portugal, and Romania have implemented what has been defined in literature foreign constituencies, so having MP and senators sitting in parliament to represent the expatriate community. It's very interesting how over the years, and I was looking at my colleagues in Europe lately, there is more and more discussion about why countries decide to engage and why countries start to allow immigrants to cast a vote. From the Italian perspective, something has changed over the past year. And the trigger was in fact the immigration wave, the recent one that allowed some changes in the policy that was implemented back in 2001. The expatriate voting policy, in fact, was implemented in 2001 after a very long discussion about whether and how immigrants should cast their vote, Italian abroad should cast a vote. And the policy was in fact designed for what we call it today the old immigration wave. So people that left Italy thinking about the first migration, maybe thinking around the 1950s, after the Second World War, and how people living in the country should be engaged and vote for the country of origin. The foreign constituency looks like that, so 4 different districts: Europe, North and Central America, South America, and the rest of the world, Africa, Asia, Oceania, and Antarctica. That's where we, Australia, stand. The policy until 2001 stated that only people enrolled at the IRE, so the Registry of Italian residing permanently abroad, could cast the vote and elect the representatives abroad. And as a matter of fact, that's the figures that we have for the national election, parliamentary election for 2006, 2008, and 2014. These are the elections where Italians permanently living abroad could vote and elect MPs and senators. And that's what happened until 2006, because the conversation started to happen in parliament, through media, and it was a very big push coming from inside institution, but also outside, to find a way to engage also people that are Italian temporarily living abroad to cast a vote and be part of the electoral process. And that was began around 2011. Just to give a sense, during the Monti's government, Mario Monti, we started to see the first policies, the first proposals to saying that there is a need to change this policy, at least allowing temporary migrants, temporary Italian, to cast the vote. Right now, the number about Italian living abroad registered at the IRE is at 4.9 million Italians, and again, this does not include temporarily abroad. This number does not include people who decide not to register at the IDE, so we assume that the number is greater than the one that is provided by the IDE. But in fact, for the expatriate voting policy, the policy allowed only people registered at the IDE to cast the vote. So we need to understand that. And then in 2011, 2012, 13, we see political parties starting to have this discussion why temporarily abroad could not cast a vote, how could be done, and thanks to the debate pushed in Parliament through five-star movement, but not just necessarily, through the narrative of the brain drain, cervelli in fuga, whether all are cervelli in fuga, I'll leave it to you. But generally speaking, this was the debate very much pushed through media. There is a need to engage temporary abroad in this scenario, and that was done through a policy implemented in 2015, and that we're going to see in a moment what were the options. As a matter of fact, even the problem of engaging temporarily abroad was not raised for many, many years, because in fact it was not a problem. The new migration wave started with the global financial crisis. So there was not a problem discussing why temporarily abroad or not could not cast a vote, even though it was a question of legitimacy. As an Italian citizen, I should be able to cast a vote. Why, if I'm living abroad for 6 months, a year, why should I not be able to vote for my country of origin? But as a matter of fact, this discussion was not touched after Tremaglia proposed and won the discussion in Parliament and won the implementation through, of course, a majority of votes in both chambers. The discussion was not engaged anymore for many, many years until the new wave of migration started, until we started to have a discussion around the Erasmus movement, the Erasmus students moving around, wanted to cast a vote. And it's also important to remember that Italians who study in Italy, not even abroad, but they study in another city, they cannot vote in the other city. They have to go back to their college. So that's also the reason why the discussion was not really embraced for many, many years, because for instance, I studied in Perugia for 5 years, and for 5 years I could not vote unless going back to Treviso, where I'm from. So for 5 years I did not vote, because most of the time was coming right in the middle of exams. So that's the reality of things. And so for many, many years, people traveling and so on could not vote. It was very interesting to be in Parliament and interviewing politicians while they were discussing options on how to allow temporarily abroad to cast a vote. It was very, very interesting to see the discussion, the narrative was going on, what political parties wanted, and what kind of pressure they had from media and so on. And as a matter of fact, on the table they had two options. The first option is including temporarily abroad to cast a vote within the foreign constituency, so people that stay abroad can cast a vote for the map that we saw before. So depending whether they're in Australia or they're in Europe, they can cast a vote and elect the representatives of Italians abroad. And there was the first option, and was considered the easiest solution in terms of the system is already in place. We just have to add people to the system. Or the second one that was considered more fair in some ways, was voter counted in domestic district of the country of origin. So that was the other option, something that would make more sense in some ways, because people were just living abroad just for a couple of months or maybe a year or so. Why would they have to cast a vote and elect a member of parliament that is there to represent permanent migration abroad? So that was the discussion, but as you can imagine, they went with the easiest solution. There was a need to implement this policy. They had so much pressure and they had to hurry up. It took roughly 4 years to finally deliver, but with Renzi's government, they delivered this policy, and generally speaking, this policy was very upsetting and disappointing. First of all, MPs and senators elected abroad did not want this policy to happen because they were worried about a contamination of votes. As we know, Italians abroad are very different from Italians in Italy in the way they vote. And now we have numbers that can testify this. Just an example, the constitutional referendum that we had 2 years ago now, votes were casted, and while in Italy we had a majority voting against the referendum changes, now we have, abroad we had the opposite result. So it was very interesting. Second of all, Italians temporarily abroad were not happy with that because why? Again, would they be interested in casting a vote for MPs and senators abroad? So there was no importance whatsoever. But also, we need to remember that votes cast abroad do not have any impact in determining the majority in parliament. So meaning that the importance of the vote was not recognized and were considered not at the same level that they were supposed to, of their vote if they were back in Italy electing MPs or senators in their own constituency and district back in Italy. It was seen as a convenient solution for political parties because of the pressure, and it was very interesting to see the kind of how they had to hurry up and to come with a result. But it was very interesting to see eventually the results of the 2018 elections, and here we have them. As you can see, numbers of the electorate is always increasing, but as we know, these numbers are not increasing because of migration, but they're increasing because of second, third generation Italian applying for the Italian citizenship. So it's not related to the new migration wave. At the same time, so we have seen this trend happening, increasing electorate in both Chamber of Deputies and Senate. At the same time, however, we see decreasing in votes as steadily but slowly every single election at the Chamber of Deputies and in the Senate, meaning that in fact what MPs and senators elected abroad had in mind, so they were worried about contamination, this contamination did not happen at all. As a matter of fact, when we asked, Bruno and I asked to the General Counsel at the consulate here in Melbourne how many temporarily abroad applied to vote in 2018 here in Melbourne, the answer was roughly 150 people. Meaning that not many people really were interested in voting whatsoever. So all the rumors, all the debate around engaging temporary migrants, especially here in Australia, probably not really have any relevance. We could have a different discussion in Europe, for instance, for sure. What is interesting in the analysis of what's going on here, and I'm sure we have to study, there is a need to a more in-depth analysis of the political identity of immigrants, not just necessarily for the old migration, but also for the new migration. Are the new temporary migrants really interested in developing this political identity and cast their vote for abroad? Or, because as we know, it's very, very important for the old migration to continue cast the vote and participate because it's part of their Italian identity. It seems like there's a very strong correlation between being Italian and being able to cast a vote. So when we have this kind of discussion of why people, second, third generation Italians should vote, then of course the discussion goes back into because I'm Italian is my right. I feel Italian only through my vote, or just also because I can vote. Definitely it would be interesting to see also, and that's something that's a challenging here, whether what's going on around the world. It's very, very hard to gather data. We'll have probably to knock the door of every single consulate and ask, so how many temporary abroad enrolled to vote, because these kind of numbers are very hard to find. And as we know, it's nowadays, after a month, we don't have the official results of the foreign constituency because they haven't completed to count votes. Something went very wrong and we don't know what happened, but these numbers are not the official number from the Minister of the Interior, but they're not the final numbers. So I just wonder whether and how we're going to be able to see how many temporarily abroad actually enrolled to cast a vote in this moment and this time, and whether the narrative around the Erasmus generation, temporarily abroad, people moving temporarily outside Italy is actually something that's going to stay in place, or it's going to become too complicated and because of numbers is going to be withdrawn quite soon. Thank you very much.